Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the AI InterConnect podcast. I'm your host, Lauren, and this show explores how funders and innovators are building the next generation of technology and what they are learning along the way. At AI InterConnect, the goal is simple to create real conversation with people who are actively shaping industries through AI, data, and new platform. And today I'm joined by Daniel Sieberg, and founder and CEO of ScreenGenius. And ScreenGenius is building an AI-powered discovery layer that help people find the right content, product, and information faster across complex digital platform. Daniel, thanks for being here. Very happy to have you on the show.
Laura, it's my pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, wonderful. A great friendly conversation. Let's start with your background so listeners understand the path that led you here. Daniel, your background is, I'll start, is quite unique. You move from journalism to media into technology and now into AI infrastructure. Daniel, how did your background in media, storytelling, and technology eventually lead you to build Screen Genius?
Laurent, well, you're right. I have done a few career pivots, if you will. I did start my career as a journalist covering science and technology for CNN and CBS and later ABC. And, that decade plus helped me to discover the value of storytelling, what it means to have your own story, to understand the stories of others, to tell those to a larger audience, and being exposed to hundreds, if not thousands, of companies and ideas and founders and innovators. It really immersed me in this whole 21st century way of thinking about where we're all headed. And it was a foundational layer, I would say, for what I went on to do next, which was in marketing and communication. I want to say I was recruited. I was lucky enough to be recruited by a team at Google back in 2011. They were building out a team that was focused on bridging the gap between the news ecosystem and a big tech company like Google. And I needed to reimagine my career, my job. I had been a practicing journalist for more than a decade, and coming into Google was a totally different experience. I suffered from a lot of imposter syndrome, if people are familiar with that term, where you feel like everybody's smarter than you, everybody knows more than you, everybody sort of understands how Google works. So it took me a few years to kind of find my way at the company and understand my place. And eventually I was able to collaborate with a few colleagues and build a couple of teams, international teams. Eventually one went on to be called the Google News Lab, which continues to exist today. And it sort of plays upon that idea of bridging the news ecosystem at a tech company like Google. And I had the opportunity to travel around the world. I feel like, again, having done that as a journalist. And by the time I'd been at Google for about 6 years, I thought I knew enough to go off and build my own company. So in 2017, I left Google to venture off into entrepreneurship. So it's been almost a decade that I've been in and around entrepreneurship. I've co-founded a couple of other companies, founded ScreenGenius nearly 3 years ago. And I worked at a couple of big tech companies in the meantime at Huawei and Moody's within their innovation teams. So it's been about 25, 26 years. I've earned every single one of these gray hairs, Laurent, in my in my career between my personal and professional life.
I love it. Um, yeah, you're still modest. Okay, then. Now you've been doing so many things. I even watched a TED episode or where you interviewed Jan LeCun and Kasparov, and that blew my mind. This interview was amazing.
Well, and this was part of the World Science Festival back in, I think it was 2019 or 2020. And the topic was artificial general intelligence. And as somebody who's been fascinated with AI and robotics since I was a teenager reading Isaac Asimov, to have the opportunity to learn from these minds, as you mentioned, Jan LeCun, who's now just raised $1 billion for his own startup. At the time, he was leading AI initiatives at Meta, at Facebook. Gary Kasparov, who I had interviewed once before, and he's taken his deeply analytical mind, thinking about chess and strategy, and he's really become an authoritative figure on the power of artificial intelligence. I had an opportunity to read some of his book. I'm not going to pretend I completed it. I read more than half of it leading up to that event, and then there were a couple of other panelists at the time. A woman named Shannon Valor, who is an AI ethicist, a fascinating discipline within artificial intelligence, and then Hod Lipson, who was looking at robotics and at NYU. So this was a few years before all of the kind of hysteria and hype cycle around AI, and it was focused on artificial general intelligence, which is still debated as something that we're all a bit intrigued by, this concept of an AI that's either as smart or smarter than human beings. I would admit that when I use an AI assistant today, they feel smarter than me. So, it's hard to imagine where they can go from here. But that felt like the sort of the dawn of it becoming much more public and available for all of us.
Yeah. Okay, that's the kind of geniuses that I would love in my podcast very going forward. Okay,
Yeah.
then one
I'll do
one
my best to
thing,
channel
one
them
thing.
into this. Yeah.
I enjoy this. But I had already 170 other geniuses on my podcast.
Yeah.
In there's some. Um, and you for
Well,
the
and I
time
should
being.
say,
Then
ScreenGenius as a company, by the way, we like to say that we want to help other people be smart about what's on their screens. We don't see ourselves as the geniuses in this, if you will. It's more that we want to, as you mentioned at the outset, help other companies help their customers be smart about what's on your screen. We're all surrounded by screens every day, all day long. I wrote a book in 2011 called The Digital Diet, which was all about my own overconsumption of screens and technology. So here we think is an opportunity for AI to help us to make these decisions more efficiently, maybe more personally, and just better as we're all surrounded by so much data and information.
yeah, no, definitely. And one thing that stand out when looking at Screen Genius is that you're not positioning it as a simple product. You're describing it as infrastructure for discovery. And and Daniel, when you explain Screen Genius to someone outside the industry, um, how how do you describe what you actually do and will you help?
Yes. So what we have learned from talking to, I'm going to say, a few dozen different companies, and we're at a stage now. We're an early stage startup. We're now starting to pilot our technology and create prototypes within these different data sets. We had a public launch back in the fall with the Minnesota Star Tribune. That was an opportunity to help people decide what to eat as part of the Minnesota State Fair. So a slightly different application. But really, if you imagine that just about every website and app that any of us go to today, where there's a large digital catalog. And that catalog could be, as you mentioned, products, it could be clothes, it could be movie streams, audio streams, it could be whatever it is. And when we go to these sites and apps, we're faced with really one of two ways to find whatever we want. We can scroll around forever. Sometimes we like to do a little browsing. That's a bit of our human nature, just being a bit curious. Or we can go into the search bar and type in a keyword or two. But what we've all come to discover is that it often doesn't understand us. We get no results. It's a bit tedious and time consuming. And on the other side of that, the businesses that are sitting on these enormous digital catalogs, sometimes hundreds of thousands of SKUs or products, maybe even millions, that's lost opportunity, lost inventory to connect to that person. So the layer that we're building and offering to companies is that discovery layer between what you're in the mood for, what you're thinking about as a consumer, and whatever inventory that would map to that moment or your interest. And of course, companies could do this on their own. We see this as the classic innovator's dilemma. This is why SaaS markets have ever been built up in technological history. If you're a large company or even a medium-sized company, and you're thinking about integrating these types of modalities into your data layer, so conversational. We like to say we can turn keywords into conversations. We turn wandering around into winning. So adding the ways that we've now come to appreciate AI assistance using your voice, conversational text or audio, maybe uploading a photo so it can recognize, maybe you're interested in a particular pair of pants and you can show something similar and you can show the retailer, what you have in mind. It could be even a video chat someday that we could integrate. All of these modalities are what we're becoming more accustomed to using our AI assistants. And a large or medium-sized company faces this classic innovator's dilemma laid out by Clayton Christensen, many years ago when he looked at the hard drive industry and thinking and storage space. And so if you're a company, you think, well, maybe this would benefit our bottom line. And our research tells us that average order values can be boosted anywhere from about 15 to 30%. In other words, that's the opportunity for companies to integrate this. So we can come into a company, we're at this piloting stage right now. So we're talking to CTOs and CDOs and CEOs, as much of the C-suite as we can, to understand their pain points. How can we layer this into their existing search infrastructure? So we don't need to come in and rip out whatever they currently have, but we can layer in this machine learning AI understanding, orchestrate their data for them. And that's a big part of the challenge for us is data management in this. But we can help their customers ideally have a much better experience and boost their revenue and their bottom line. And our ambition for this, we're at this piloting stage. I would love to share the names of the companies that we're talking to. We're not public about them yet, but they're, I would say, recognizable brands and top tier companies. And someday we see evolving to a platform so that whatever your product is, whatever your digital catalog is, you could plug into our platform and we could offer a bit of a turnkey solution to integrate into that and bring it to life. So it's it's a it's a bit of a flipping of the SaaS way of thinking about rather than software as a service. We're not offering seats as part of a software package. We're flipping it around and we're offering service as a software. So we're offering AI discoverability to these companies. That's what our engineering team, and I have two technical co-founders, that's what we're focused on, is building out these algorithms and recommendation engine to bring that into their ecosystem and bring it to life is kind of how we imagine it. It's this discovery layer. We're all curious. We all have questions. We all wonder about, did we miss that product? Is this really what we want? Is there something better out there? And in the retail or sales world, this is thought of as customer confidence, right? How do we boost customer confidence so that we all feel better about whatever we either consume or spend our time on?
I love it. I love it. This is a great idea. I think it's coming from you. A universal navigation layer for human curiosity.
Yeah, yeah.
I love that. And
Well, and I was, this all started, I'd love to say that I had the foresight to found a company that is doing what we're doing now. But the reality is that I founded this company almost 3 years ago as a frustrated dad who couldn't figure out what to watch. And I wondered if AI could help us to make better decisions as kind of this, we've heard terms like co-pilot or assistant or concierge, that it can accompany us as we're making these decisions. That the opportunity is for, I'm going to say AI broadly, but machine learning and this kind of understanding of data to help us with these giant complex inventories. If you're trying to figure out what to watch, you even go to any streaming platform, you're faced with scrolling around, looking at people in the room who get annoyed and can't find anything. If I like to say, the phrase is necessity is the mother of invention. And if that holds true, then I would suggest that frustration is the father of invention. And so we were a B2C app that intended to index all of streaming across news, entertainment, and sports. That was our original concept. And it became clear that in order to market that app, and that might be something that we go back to someday, but in order to market that app, we would have needed a tremendous amount of investment up front. There was already some competition in this space. And so we pivoted a little more than a year ago to sort of take the underlying engine within that idea. We had this B2C app, a wrapper to kind of think about, what you wanted to watch. We took the engine out of that and we thought, what verticals could we apply this to beyond just streaming? Would it work for audio? Could it work for products? Could it work for, other things that we need to make decisions about that we're consuming as a species? I mean, not to be too, sort of philosophical about it, but we've created as a species, having been in and around technology now for the better part quarter of a century, we have created an enormous amount of digital stuff. And just about every website or app is like its own mini internet now, with hundreds and thousands of pages of data, of content, of products, and go on and on and on. And in order to, and by the way, this extends not just externally for customers who come into a store or an app or a site, but internally for companies that have a lot of data to go through. Could be a newsroom, for example, has a lot of archives, a lot of their own content. When I worked as a journalist, that was a big challenge, just trying to find all of your own internal stuff. So we see an internal and external market that we can sell into to help anybody better discover whatever they're in the mood for. So we've had our pivot, if you will. I mean, obviously we're not $100 million revenue a year company yet, so it wasn't some massive pivot that we needed to do. But we needed to reimagine ourselves from a B2C company to a B2B company. And I have had some experience in my career thinking about what that means. And so we've been exploring that market. We've got these pilots up and running that we hope to get out, in a more public facing way soon, and eventually evolve this into an automated platform. And we're not alone in this, by the way. I mean, certainly have competition. We're well aware of some of the other companies that are out there that are doing something similar. And this to us is the evolution of AI as a service, that if you are a medium sized or a big company or a small company, you don't need to hire a bunch of engineers. You don't need to spin all this up internally. The cost of licensing it from us, we have some thoughts around price points and how we can do this in an ROI beneficial way to these companies, but also to measure the success of it so that we can demonstrate the value of this. And then our revenue would be dependent on that. In order for us to be successful, our customers need to be successful.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. That's great. I love it. Um, and what feels like the hardest part of running and scaling a Screen Genius?
Oh boy, what a great question. I mean, you know,
Where to start?
yeah, we're you know, uh, having been a co-founder a couple of other times, and having tried to start my own company previously that was more about AI and hardware. Now having been at in the founder and the CEO seat for the past nearly 3 years, I do keep a rough running tally in my head. This is like day 1017 since I did anything about the idea that I had. And the I think the what I've come to appreciate is that I've needed to read so many books. I've needed to learn from so many people. I mean, the Academy Awards were the other night, and people get up there and they thank all these people when they receive an award. I could already list dozens and dozens of people who've helped me just to get to this moment. And I think that so much of what uh, any startup needs at its core is resiliency. And if you can find that in yourself, which I believe that any of us have the capacity to do that. I often encourage my daughters to think about someday starting their own company, but to find that faith in yourself, to find that belief in yourself, and whatever you need to pull on as inspiration in your life and the people around you, it is an extraordinary journey. It's not something it has been an absolute roller coaster. So I think probably the biggest challenge to do my best to answer your question, the biggest challenge in this is to take a step back every so often, recenter yourself, imagine where things are headed. I sometimes liken, people talk about space a lot with startups. You're going to have your moon shot. You're going to like achieve some, big success. People talk about space and startups a lot. I love space. On the other hand, since probably none of us are ever going to get to go to Mars or the moon necessarily, to kind of ground it in something that maybe we can appreciate, I like to think of it as being on a ship at sea, right? And once upon a time in our human history, even 200 years ago or 150 years ago, as a ship's captain, you found your crew, which might have been the people who were part of your startup, and you set off at sea, and you had some maps, and you had a sextant and a compass, and you sort of had an idea of where the treasure was, and you were like, "Come on, everybody, we're going to go this way," right? And then you started to go that way. You discovered, "Now this isn't what we imagined, or we're off course, and now we got to adjust course." And I feel like some of the best ship's captains, one of my favorite book series that my dad and I read is called Master and Commander, and there's the character Lucky Jack. He's the captain of this ship, and they find themselves in these in these incredible scenarios and stuff that they hadn't anticipated, and they need to think in real time about how to adapt into whatever's going on. So I think the biggest challenge is that kind of need to find resiliency and center yourself and every day, and to be able to communicate that effectively to the people around you so that you can lead the way and have that kind of faith and confidence in yourself. Because the fastest way for any startup is to fail is just to give up. And that of course there are all sorts of reasons that we might need to put things aside or move on to something else. But to me, that is one of the greatest opportunities in life, is to understand how to lead yourself, and then to lead others to wherever it is that you're headed.
Beautiful. Love it. Across many industries right now, we are seeing huge changes in how people search, discover and interact with information. From from your vantage point, building discovery technology, what shifts in the AI and digital ecosystem matters most right now,
Hmm.
but is still underappreciated?
Yeah, I guess I would say that, eh, once upon a time when we had fewer things to search for, that we didn't need the kind of nuance that AI and machine learning allows. And in the data world, that's often referred to as metadata, right? So the kind of tags and words that are now, people refer to them as tokens within, an AI, the coherence of an AI sentence, and how does it understand us and language, and these large language models. And I feel like what's changed in discovery, in addition to, we've created this vast amount of information and data, are the ways in which we can express, as a human being in any language. I mean, I know you're a multilingual person. I'm barely able to speak English most days. So I rely on English as my only language. But when you converse with an AI assistant now, it gets you and understands you. And this idea of fetching something that you're interested in, or finding something that maps to your mood, we're more sophisticated and complex creatures when it comes to what we all want individually, that I think keywords have allowed us to be up until now. So even as somebody who worked at Google, and one of the things that I used to do at Google was work with the Google Trends team, and we would look at the types of searches that people would do across all of Google. And when I was at Google, and I'm going to try to remember this data point, I think when I was at Google, there was, like, I'm going to get this wrong, there were 2 billion searches a day, 3 billion, 4 billion, some crazy number of searches per day, right? And the amount of data that would come back from that, when you could see the insights as to what people were looking for. But the actual queries were so short. They were like 2 words or 3 words or 4 words. If you put in a whole sentence, no, it didn't seem to, couldn't seem to understand, or it would get it wrong, or it would, return results that didn't make sense. And so we've evolved now to this place where discovery is much more aligned with just how we feel. And I think this is kind of the mood part of, what, what, what do any of us in the mood to watch, the mood to listen to, the mood to buy, right? This is a very personal way to think about the decisions that we make. And the subtleties of what machine learning and AI can offer us now, I think, are exciting for companies that are sitting on these vast inventories. And to bring this to life, this is kind of the long tail of all of these products. And many of these inventories are dynamic, they're changing constantly. So to kind of, or to orchestrate that, and to create this much more pleasing, much more enjoyable experience, rather than wasting time scrolling around, feeling frustrated that you couldn't find whatever it is that you wanted. And every time you go somewhere else, of course, that company is losing your business.
Yeah. No, I really love it. Awesome. You are building something that sits at the intersection of AI agent, commerce, media, and digital discovery. That's that's a fascinating place to operate.
It is.
Um, looking ahead, 12 to 18 months or maybe shorter, what
Mm.
does success realistically looks like for a screen genius?
Aha, Laurent. Well, so, I would say that our ambition over the next year is to be able to build out this automated platform. Now, in order to do that, the reality is we're going to need additional investment to do it faster. I mean, these things do obviously take some amount of time, even with vibe coding, and people talk about how AI can help to fill the gap with engineering and all of that. I appreciate when people say that. I get it. At the same time, running a business, developing relationships, the complexities of just commercial agreements, testing and ensuring that you're mapping to the right success metrics, building a platform that's managing data, that's secure, that adheres to all the kind of compliance that, we all need to think about in today's world. This all takes time. So, 6 to 12 months from now, I'd like to imagine that we've achieved that platform status. And along the way, that we have launched some pilots that are beneficial to humanity. I mean, that people can see the value of what we're doing and they kind of go, oh, I get it. And when I've showed what we're doing with some of our prototypes to people, the reaction is often like, oh, I see. Oh, that seems better than what it is today. And I think the hypothesis for us is that this could be at least 10 times better than it currently is. And that is where startups, I think, start to find their momentum, their traction when they can demonstrate the value of what they're up to. So that is really our task over the next, 6 to 12 months, is to be able to demonstrate this, put our sort of walk the walk, if you will, right? I mean, we have all sorts of hypotheses. We think this can be beneficial to companies. We think it can save them money in the long term and help them to make money. These are the two ways that, in a B2B market, we're either helping companies save money or we're helping them to make money. And for us, we see ways to do both. And this is where the rubber meets the road for us. So I feel like we have an exciting 6 to 12 months ahead, but it's not going to be without work. And I think the myth in the AI world in which we live with startups is that there's just somebody pushing a button and the AI is kind of off doing everything, writing the code, building this, coming up with the deck, presenting these, it just, I think it's gotten a little bit out of hand. As much as all these tools are going to evolve and create, perhaps more and more opportunities, there will be jobs lost. There will be a lot of uncertainty around some of the market dynamics that are going on. Which companies kind of settle out in all of this remains to be seen. But regardless of all of that, we feel like we have a place in the future of discovery, and that we can help to bring this at scale in a way that feels like we're evolving past scrolling around and keyword searches, which are starting to feel pretty antiquated in 2026.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, fair enough. I like this. Then, are there any other areas you're deliberately choosing not to pursue
Mm.
so you can stay focused?
Yeah, great question. I mean, our ICP, or ideal customer profile, are these commerce and content companies with complex inventories or data sets that they need to bring to life. We're less inclined to go after financial companies, for example, or banking or legal companies. There are other companies like us that are targeting those companies. And for us, that's a little bit of our moat. People talk a lot about a defensible moat. We have some existing relationships in the content and commerce world. I think we have some domain expertise across our team. We've got, I think, just a market share that is certainly a big enough TAM. People talk about a total addressable market. This is sizable enough that we could certainly carve out a portion for us. There could still be a healthy amount of competition. I don't think we're imagining we're going to own every single company that would benefit from this, but we're trying to be as focused as we can on the companies that depend on this on a daily basis, that the difference between their success and then not success is discoverability that in the past has been quite limited. And, this is where, and I would say that we've really been pulled into this market. If I had not heard from the C-suite level saying, we find this compelling, we find this interesting, we'd love to test this out, we want to explore this more, show us what you're doing, then I don't think we would have got as far into these waters, to kind of pull on the ship's captain idea for a second. And so we've really leaned into the idea of commerce and content, and that again could involve all different types of products, but so much of it comes down to what we consume, how we spend our money on these things, and that there's this benefit both externally and internally. But we do need to continue to focus, and our pilots are really quite focused on some verticals that are around uh, audio, around video, around some like text. We're even in an art space, discovering sort of media art, but also retail and different products. So we want to stay focused, but also have a big enough way to think about our total addressable market that it's exciting for investors to come in and see this at scale, because we're focused on the US, Canada, a little bit the UK and Europe, I would say. But, you know, I think we have an opportunity to scale this all over the world, dude, because, this is part of the opportunity with AI, is that you can use any language, and the discoverability of it is something that we all can appreciate no matter where we live.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The sky is the limit.
Mm,
Um, many many listeners on this podcast are funders, operators, and builders working in AI and emerging technology. Based on everything you have learned so far, building ScreenGenius, uh, what should funders in similar position start doing,
mm.
or maybe stop doing?
Aha. Well, I would say, first of all, I am not a technical founder. As much as I love to learn, and I believe that, being a lifelong learner is an opportunity, always be learning. So I'm constantly learning from engineers and people who build things. And, sometimes just as an example, I got a message from one of my co-founders, our head of AI and data science. And he messaged me this morning. He said, I've been working on something new. I can't wait to show you. I'm just testing it now. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is incredible. I can't wait to see what he's put together. In today's world, you can experiment with some of these tools. You can build some stuff as a non-technical founder. You can only get so far doing that, without having that really underlying understanding of what engineering is, even in the way it's all headed. So I think from a founder perspective, don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know, I don't understand, right? Turning to your advisors, surrounding yourself with the kind of advisors who are not just there to say, Daniel, that sounds amazing. Way to go. That's great, right? I mean, I've had lots of ideas, and some of them have survived. Even the name of the company wasn't my idea. It was originally called the Streaming Guide. So, I love the collaborative nature of being a part of a startup. I love to learn. I love problem solving. I love, working with people who are smarter than me about so many things, and that we can come together and find these kind of solutions. And one of my favorite expressions, it was uh, it was said in the movie F1 recently. I guess I'm thinking about the Academy Awards recently, but the expression is, "Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast." And I think one of the tendencies as a founder and a CEO is you kind of want to just go, you're like, I got all these ideas, we can do this, let's get out there, raise a bunch of money, and let's get out into market. And you kind of skip over the part where you need to learn whatever it is you need to learn. There's a lot of critical thinking that goes into this.
Uh,
And you don't know what you don't know. And, I have needed the last few years to not only to figure out the market and the business and all that, not all that's going to be something that's we're going to learn about forever. I don't know that there's ever going to be a day when we're going to be like, oh, well, we've kind of figured everything out. We can just go home now. But at the same time, I've needed to do a lot of my own personal growth. And I think that as a founder and CEO, if that is something that anybody wants to do, be prepared to pursue the best version of yourself that you can possibly imagine. And it's going to be one of those sort of trial by fire journeys. You're going to encounter a lot of stuff. One of the most challenging things that I've discovered in this, when I mentioned the resiliency part, we all have, I think, that capacity to find resilience. How that affects other people around you. Maybe you're struggling emotionally, you're struggling financially, you're struggling with, figuring out what to do next. As a founder and a CEO can be quite isolating. You can be on your own a lot. I have a beautiful dog who hears me talk about all kinds of things, but sometimes he's the only one because, maybe you're working from home, maybe your partners are doing other things. You don't want to burden them with every single thing that you're trying to figure out. You do need to be able to ask questions. I think that's one of the things that I've taken from journalism is to just feel comfortable asking questions and admitting that you don't know. And I think that to me is part of the adventure in all of this because it all becomes part of your story, right? To kind of go back to where we started in this conversation, it's your story. And I almost 3 years ago, Laurent, if somebody had handed me $1 million check almost a few years ago. And of course, that's what any founder wants. They just want somebody to give them a bunch of money so they can go do the thing that they have an idea for. But if somebody had done that, I think I would have messed it up. And I have needed to reset a lot and get a lot of mental clarity. I have my own personal discipline that I apply every day between mind, body, spirit, and emotions to just stay grounded and ensure that I can be good to the people around me. Because it is quite a journey. I know now why people say it's hard to sell their company or hard to exit. We have thoughts about all of that someday. But letting go of a company can be hard. As challenging as it was, and as much as you sacrificed and compromised along the way, to someday step back from it, I can see why that is hard. I can see why founders almost want to die at the desk. So, not that I'm intending to do that anytime soon, but I also have thoughts on what I want to
Well,
do after this. And I think that's one of the things I'll just add is that I think it's a healthy perspective to think about what you want to do after you found a company. What does it provide for? If it's something financially, if that allows you to have greater choices or make other decisions in your life, what are those exactly? And that way you can sort of just start to again in that kind of navigation way of thinking about your life as a ship's captain, just orient yourself a little bit towards whatever it is that's important to you. We're all here for what 100 years if we're lucky, maybe a little longer. I mean, and so this is a part of my life and how I can add value to the people in and around me, but also the broader humanity, if you will, having held roles and worked at companies where that global way of thinking has been part of my journey. And so now to have that opportunity to do that at scale is something I take I take it seriously. At the same time, I try not to take myself too seriously, and I think that's the other opportunity. If you can't have a sense of humor
yeah, like,
every day, you're missing out. So,
of course. No, no, I love it.
yeah.
I love it. Daniel, this is just amazing. Thank you for uh, taking the time and your strong insight into your journey and your industry and the work you're doing at ScreenGenius.
Mm.
Wonderful conversation. I love it. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Laurent. Merci beaucoup.
And where can people find you and learn about your work or
Yeah,
ScreenGenius?
ScreenGenius, we have a little fun with the name, so it's ScreenGeni.us. So ScreenGenie.us, that's our site. We're on LinkedIn, and people are welcome to reach out to me. I can't think of a single meeting that I haven't taken over the last nearly 3 years. So I'm always happy to spin up a conversation, whether it's about creating a pilot or investment or just to kind of learn from each other in life.
Wonderful. Love it. Daniel, thank you so much. It was great. We'll do it again.
Thank you. Sounds good.
Okay. And that's it for today's episode of AI InterConnect. And if you enjoy it, share it with someone who is building the future, or better yet, someone who should be. And until next time, stay curious, stay creative, and keep building. Thank you. Bye bye, Daniel.
Bye bye. Thanks, sir.